What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this video, I'm going to be building an awesome gaming PC build inside the new, refreshed NZXT H1. With better airflow than the previous model, support for larger graphics cards, and a higher wattage included power supply, it addresses the three main complaints I had with the previous model. I'll be pairing the new H1 up with an RTX 3070, DDR5 memory, and one of the latest 12th gen Intel CPUs to put the changes well and truly to the test. So let's do this, and let's kick things off by installing as many components into the motherboard as possible, otherwise referred to as the motherboard assembly. This motherboard right here is the Asus ROG STRIX Z690i, the I of course standing for ITX. Now this is one of the most innovative little ITX motherboards I've ever seen, and you can see exactly what I'm referring to when you take this out of the box. This here is a module with two USB-C connections that adds SATA ports, your JFP1, RGB headers, and basically helps to extend out the PCB of this motherboard to cram more and more hardware in. Support for the latest Intel 12th gen CPUs out of the box as well, with DDR5 memory support, really puts this on the cutting edge of motherboards, while Wi-Fi 6E, Thunderbolt on the rear panel, and this insane M.2 array that supports the latest in Gen 4 SSDs, this motherboard is utterly bonkers. Asus have absolutely smashed it out of the park, and it's a high-end motherboard deserving of our high-end case. I'll come back to installing the M.2 Gen 4 drive later. First, we're going to pop in the CPU. Intel's latest and greatest Core i7 12700K. With Intel's latest performance and efficiency cores, it basically combines the best of single-threaded performance for some older games or less optimized titles, and the best of multi-core, multi-threaded performance. Perfect for applications like streaming, video editing, or rendering. It also works well on the power consumption front, and it's no secret that Intel have absolutely killed it. Intel have just gone in, got their boxing gloves on and gone poof, 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 and knocked AMD right out of the park, at least for now, and that's great to see. I'm so happy that Intel are back at the top of the CPU market, and let's see how long it stays that way, shall we? All we then need to do is pop our CPU socket down, the little black plastic Asus ROG STRIX sticker will pop straight off, and then we're pretty much done. We're also going to pop our memory or our RAM in at this stage. Now I talked about how Intel had got the boxing gloves out, well so have Corsair, with their latest DDR5 memory SKUs. This is their Vengeance 5200MHz DDR5 kit. With 2 RAM DIMMs, you get 32 gigs of total memory, though of course they do bigger DIMMs if you're looking for a bit more capacity. 32 gigabytes is the sweet spot, not only for gaming, but also for a range of productivity tasks in 2022. You definitely don't want any less than this, as that is going to start causing bottlenecking, especially with an RTX 3070 GPU or thereabouts. If there's one thing that Intel have also done with the latest CPUs, it's exposed bottlenecks elsewhere in your system. Before you could get away with slower Gen 3 storage, but now, if you really want to maximize the gaming performance, you've got to go ahead and pick up something higher end, something with a bit more gusto, a little bit more oomph to it, and that's where the NVMe choice for this build comes in, Seagate's Firecuda 530. Now, we install this, I believe, under this very top slot right here. There are further M.2 connections underneath, so you can very much so create an M.2 sandwich. This one here is the Seagate Firecuda flavor. In fact, this is rather awkward. There's another one. There's another Firecuda 530 already installed underneath. Okay. Well, this is awkward. I wasn't expecting that. So either I take this one out and actually install this one properly, or I just leave it there and the people shall never know. This board comes with a great little removal tool though, which does make removal nice and easy. So if you make a doozy like me, you can very easily take the drive out and swap it back in for the same or a different one, securing it into place with the plastic stopper. What a winning combination this Z690 board and Seagate Firecuda 530 is. Amazing. I wasn't really expecting that, to be honest with you. Once the motherboard is out of the way, we can then move on to the case. Obviously, one of the most exciting components in this build in particular. Previously, when selecting a case like this, I might have been partial to go for the white version, as I think for cases, they often stand out a little bit better. I was feeling something a bit more stealthy, a bit more Leaning Tower of NZXT H1. No, I'm just kidding. I'm trying not to get static electricity shock. That was a success, and that will reveal the new H1. Now, for the purposes of comparison, I'll go and dig out our old H1 so you can see the approximate side-by-side difference as far as size goes. I'm not sure if the tooling of the case is actually any bigger than the last generation. I just know for a fact it supports bigger graphics cards, and it's got more airflow. So you've got all the panels are actually ventilated apart from the glass panel, whereas before I think it was only 1 or 2 of the additional panels. It means you can still see the internals of your system, of your GPU, of all that good stuff, but you do get a bit more by way of ventilation. Something which is evidently very important. Now let's see if I can remember how you actually take this thing apart, because the H1 is more of like a kit than it is a case. It actually comes with a power supply and a cooler, pre-installed and integrated. Something which seems a bit excessive, but is actually required, given of course how compact this case is and how bespoke many of your components are. So there's the first panel, then the second one. That fan definitely looks new, an exhaust fan in the GPU chamber to pull hot air away from the graphics card. Nice touch. I think we should then be able to remove these side panels here. No, I remember now. You have to lay it flat and then it kind of, you unpack it. It's like a parcel. This section here also feels sizably heavier and better well built than the last gen, which felt more flimsy, so that's good. And then, in theory, we should have a complete H1. Now, on this side, you can see you've got room for your GPU. We're going to try and fit a big Asus TUF card in here, one of the largest around. I think it's bigger than the STRIX card, so that will be a test later on. And then, of course, on this side, we've got our radiator, so that's your 140mm all-in-one cooler. The pump is integrated into the radiator, so don't worry about the orientation quite so much of the pump head itself. And then, I think we just take these 2 screws out. There's one, there's the second one. Power supply, of course, is hiding nicely above it. And in theory, he says, I think this should just sort of work. There we go. Right. Nice. That works. Pump is there. You can stay out of the way. This then comes out. Oh, yes. Nicely done. I can't remember if NZXT did this last time, but they've pre-ran the motherboard power cable to the right place and the CPU power connection, which obviously shows us the orientation of the motherboard should be a little something like this. And that way the ports can be accessed from the bottom of the case, I believe, from this sort of ventilated underneath area. Obviously, in like a normal build, you'd see me match up all the screws and all that good stuff, but because this is an ITX board, you just need to put 1 screw in each corner, and that will line up absolutely no problem. If you're intrigued where the I/O shield comes out, it's just down here at the bottom of the case, behind where our radiator is when it's folded back in the build position. So let's go ahead and screw this in, plug up the motherboard and CPU power connections, then connect up the PCIe riser cable, which is already ran in the right location, and then we can move on to the cooler. Really simple actually. NZXT do such a good job with the H1 design, especially now they've fixed some of the more controversial issues the case had. Right, so I'm pretty well versed when it comes to the NZXT H1 basic installation, but the cooler not so much, especially because we are of course using an Intel sockets. This is AMD, maybe the other side. AMD, Intel. Marvelous. These instructions are not good. You stay there. Potentially, this pre-installed sort of mount, shall we say, if I can kind of slide it out. Yeah, there we go, lovely. Right, you stay there. Might be the right size, let me have a look. Maybe? Yes. So that's the right bracket when it comes to Intel CPUs that comes pre-installed that I've handily just removed and can't quite remember how it went on. I think a bit like this, actually. That's not too complicated, actually. Nice. And then we need the LGA 1700 bag. Okay, I was about to criticize NZXT, but this might just about be the best Intel mounting I've ever seen, but I shall await with bated breath. So you get this backplate for LGA 1700 CPUs, which is what we've got. And you can see here, there's some 3M sticky adhesive. So I'm going to leave one of those on so that if we get it wrong the first time, we've got a second try. And then spin the case over like that. Now, we've got to basically get the bracket into the motherboard, which is sort of covered slightly by this riser cable, which arguably I should have sort of done before this, but anyway, it's fine, it's okay. Being very careful, because of course this Z690 board has loads of circuitry on the back of the board, given of course how compact it is. So that's going in. Nice, that's in. Bit of adhesive, bit of pressure. Now, when we spin the case around, I hope I'm being descriptive enough. You should be able to see around the socket, we've got 4 screw threads instead of holes. So here, you see that, Dan?
No.
There.
Keep going.
Keep going, there. Oh! So sort of here, and then another one over here, and then there's another 2 at the top. We'll get loads of B-roll of this guy for you guys to make it nice and easy. We're then going to whack these screw threads on top, so they're going to go through those holes, corner by corner, and then I think the CPU cooler itself should just slot directly on top, and some thumb screws will hold it into place. Basically, backplate, posts, cooler, and screws. Nice and simple, a 4-stage process. At this stage, you would then fold the tubes in theory outwards so that the fan can go in the middle, but in our case, because of how big all of this assembly is, we're going to have to push the tubes all the way to this left-hand side, and that is going to flex the motherboard far less than any other options. Then you're going to use the 2 screws, the captive ones, I might add, we took out earlier, to fasten the radiator back into place. And once you've done that, the CPU, memory, SSD, motherboard, case are all pretty much good. Power supply, of course, is already in, so I'll rejoin you in just a second to install the GPU. But otherwise, that's already looking like one hell of a hardware sandwich. It's also very one-side heavy because there's no graphics card in this portion of the case just yet, but looking fantastic otherwise.
Double kill, triple kill.
Nicely done. Now that the cooler's in, we can indeed move on to the GPU. Now, picking a graphics card for a build in 2022, my goodness, where do the years go, is certainly not an easy endeavor. The RTX 3070, though, is one of the best GPUs architecturally that I think we've seen this year, and the Asus Tough Gaming one not only rounds out an Asus theme for this build, but also performs incredibly well. It's a lot closer to the MSRP of the reference design than something like the Asus STRIX model, which is still a great choice. Now, in this chassis, we actually have to mount the GPU sort of on its side, a little bit like this. And this is, of course, the moment of truth time where we find out whether or not it actually fits. This is a card that I can tell you for a fact would definitely not to fit in the previous version, the previous iteration of the H1. So let's push back our clip on our temporary PCIe slot, loosen those thumb screws, and find out whether or not NZXT have well and truly changed the game for small form factor enthusiasts with the new H1. This is looking positive so far. We're going to slide the GPU in. Oh my goodness, it looks amazing. Look at that. How good does that look? Dan?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. That's the kind of reassuring answer I was looking for. We do need to actually secure it back in. To do this, I'm going to lay the case down sort of flat, and we need to actually tighten the GPU in just around this sort of region just here. And then all we need to do is just power it up with these 2 8-pin power connectors. The 750 watt power supply is perfect for a 3070 and would even work well for a 3080. I wouldn't go for something like a 3090 though. I think those cards will be too big for this enclosure anyway. But either way, I am so impressed with what NZXT have done with the new H1. We need to make sure that NZXT haven't just made a mini oven, and to do that, we need to test out the performance and the temperatures. Something we will do shortly, after of course booting the system up and seeing how good it looks in typical GeekaWhat style, with an epic glam montage. Awesome stuff. Now that we've seen just how good this new NZXT H1 system looks, it's time to make sure the performance stacks up, and that the changes NZXT have made to the new H1 are justified and worthwhile. To kick things off, on your screen now is a summary, a snapshot view of all the different gaming benchmarks we ran on this 3070 powered system. This should give you an insight into the general performance, and you can find your favourite game and make sure that the frame rate aligns with what you're after. Don't worry though, we will be diving game by game in a bit more detail, kicking things off with GTA 5, where at 1440p high settings, this new H1 system achieved more than 140 frames per second. As a general rule of thumb, we always try to use a game's inbuilt benchmarking mode if it has one. This system does, so there we got some great results. It was a similarly positive story in Battlefield 2042, where at 1440p high, we tested with both DLSS enabled and disabled. Without the use of DLSS, we achieved 90 frames per second on average, with 81 and 64 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. While turning on DLSS, NVIDIA's AI-backed deep learning supersampling technology boosted us to 100 FPS. Essentially, this renders the game out at a slightly lower resolution and then uses AI to upscale, giving you a nice bit of frame rate upside. Moving on to Call of Duty Vanguard next up, here we tested out at 1440p high settings. We managed to pull in 123 FPS in what is one of my favourite Call of Duties, at least as of late. Moving on to Forza Horizon 5 next up, here we tested out at 1440p ultra settings, once again using the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode. 106 FPS was a very respectable result, and considering a racing title runs perfectly fine at 40-50 frames a second, to get more than 100 was really great to see. It was once again a good story in Halo Infinite, where at 1440p high, we achieved just shy of 120 FPS on average. All of our frame rates were tested using both MSI Afterburner's Reaver Tuner and NVIDIA FrameView where possible. Tuning down to some more esports level games next, we're rattling through a wide range of titles here. At 1440p high in Apex Legends, our mileage was once again very strong. More than 120 FPS at 1440p high settings. Tune the rest down to 1080p and I'm sure you'll surpass 150 if frame rate is what you're after. Finally, to wrap things up, we also tested out Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings, where here we pulled in more than 240 frames per second on average. Wow. The game visually looked absolutely stunning as well, despite the fact we tuned the settings down at 1080p to extrapolate the most frame rate possible. With that though, that pretty much wraps it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a big old like rating, get subscribed to see more from us. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.